wonders in the Bible. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Genesis chapter number 11. Genesis chapter 11, as the pastor mentioned last week, we started our series on the most wondrous man-made object, which I said was Noah's Ark. So we're going to take a look tonight at the most wondrous city that I believe that was ever constructed, and we find it here in Genesis chapter number 11. We're going to be taking a look at the Tower of Babel. We're going to read the first 9 verses of Genesis chapter 11. And we'll start there. We'll go from there after we've read these verses. It says, starting with verse number 1, it says, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have on one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth." So here we have the account of what is known as simply the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, you'll notice here on this title slide, I have this painting. This painting, to me, is very significant. And I'll talk about who painted it and why I think it's a significant painting as we go through this. But with the Tower of Babel, we have here, remember, this is not too far removed from when man stepped off the ark. This is, give or take a few years here, anywhere from 230 to 250 years after mankind stepped foot off of the ark. We know that the flood was the climax of the second dispensation of human history that is known as the Age of Conscience. This is the third dispensation of human history known as the Age of Human Government. And this is going to climax here with the Tower of Babel. In these first 9 verses that I read here, we get the account of how man attempts to unify himself. It says here, we do not want to be spread. It says in verse 4, we do not want to be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Now, what did God tell Noah and his family when they got off the ark? He told them to be fruitful, to multiply, and to replenish the earth. In other words, spread out, repopulate the earth top to bottom. This is not what they were wanting to do here in Genesis chapter 11. They were wanting to do their own thing. And if you'll notice here in verse number 6, this is the Lord himself speaking. In the latter half of verse 6, he says, This they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. What God is saying here is man will continually come together in disobedience and rebellion without restraint of wickedness. That is basically what God is saying here. He's not saying that if man is unified, I wouldn't know how to stop them. Because God proves here he did know exactly how to stop them. But what he is saying is that if they continue to be in this state of unity, then there will be nothing in terms of wickedness, there will be nothing left to restrain them from their own devices. Now, we want to take a look at this tonight as far as the city. And you'll notice it's not just a tower. Twice it mentions it's a city and a tower. It is a combination of the two. And you'll notice, let me just go quickly back here to this slide, this painting that I'm going to talk about later on in detail. You'll notice that it has levels, and you'll notice that it has layers to it, almost like peeling back the layers of an onion. So the city was more than just the outer perimeter. It was built in layers on the inside as well as levels going up to down, top to bottom. So there's a lot of archaeologists who believe, this is just some background here, there's a lot of archaeologists who believe that the Tower of Babel was nothing more than this structure, which was a ziggurat there in the Mesopotamian region, notably the Intimanaki, which was a ziggurat that was constructed in dedication to the Mesopotamian god Marduk. And this was done by a king of Babylon by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, circa 610 BC. So that's what they'll say, that this, well, the Tower of Babel was just this. This great ziggurat of Babylon was about 300 feet tall and was demolished by Alexander the Great. Now, they will say that that's all the Tower of Babel was. It was just a ziggurat that was constructed for this god Marduk. Well, I have some issues with that, as far as that being the Tower of Babel. First and foremost, let me just look at this from a chronological standpoint. They said that this was constructed and dedicated circa 610 BC. That's far short of when the Tower of Babel was constructed. The Tower of Babel was done approximately 250 years after the flood. And if you recall, last Sunday I said that the flood occurred roughly 4,400 years ago. So this, 610 BC, you add that to 2014 AD, that doesn't add up to being the Tower of Babel. Secondly, they said that this was a structure within the city. The Tower of Babel was a city. It wasn't just a tower, it was an actual city unto itself. And then here's the other thing, this is just my own personal feeling. They said that this ziggurat was about 300 feet tall. Do we not see buildings in downtown Atlanta or any major city that's considerably taller than that? Yeah. We don't see God coming down saying, they built the Chrysler building, I got to do something about that. They built the World Trade Center, I got to do something. God was not impressed by that. So he was not impressed with a 300-foot tall ziggurat, in my humble opinion. So the timing of this, as far as the dates, as far as it not being a city unto itself, is just a structure within a city, and just the simple fact that it was 300 foot tall. That's not going to take God by surprise and say, wow, I got to go down and check that out. So to me, this is not the Tower of Babel. What about the actual Tower of Babel itself? And that's one of the questions that people will have. Well, do you know how tall the Tower of Babel actually was? Well, in a non-canonical book called the Book of Jubilees, it says that the Tower of Babel was 8,150 feet tall. Now, whether we can take that to the bank or not, that is debatable, but it was listed as 8,150 feet tall in the Book of Jubilees. That's the equivalent of a little over 1.5 miles tall. So think about that. The tallest building on planet Earth today is the Khalifa Tower, which is in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. It stands at 2,717 feet tall. That's a little over half a mile tall. If the Tower of Babel, if the footage is accurate in the Book of Jubilees, it was 3 times taller than this. So think about that. I don't know if you can see this picture well enough or not. The Khalifa Tower, look at this. Look at these buildings here. These are not short buildings, by the way. These buildings here are probably about 20 stories tall. And look at how they're dwarfed by the Khalifa Tower. If this is accurate, this is only a third of the Tower of Babel's height, at 8,150 feet tall. I wanted to share this with you that I saw a video of an engineering professor at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He decided to conduct some research to determine, in his opinion, how tall the Tower of Babel conceivably could have been. The key to this, he said, and he actually read out of the King James Bible in Genesis chapter 11, where it says, verse 3, and they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. This is the key to this. Because they had the modern day brick, and I've got a modern day brick in my hand here. Now the bricks that they used, and the method they used to make these bricks was considerably different in their day and age. But this professor from MIT made a brick exactly the way they would have made it back in this day and age. He had a machine press, and he set it up vertically like this. He put it in the press to see how much pressure this brick could withstand before it began to crack and fall apart. When he conducted his test, he discovered that, and I'll go to the next slide to break this down for you. He discovered cooking the brick thoroughly at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is how much heat they would have applied to the brick to cook it thoroughly. At 1¼ inches tall, it would have been able to withstand 6,000 pounds of pressure vertically, like this. 3 tons of pressure, one brick could have handled. If you lay it like this, it can withstand 5 times that pressure, or 30,000 pounds of pressure. He said that if they had built the city just straight up and down, like a building, it could have been 3,500 feet tall. But in that day and age, they were doing it in a pyramid configuration like the ziggurat. So there were levels where each level was shorter and not as wide. The circumference was not as wide as the level preceding it. If they did that in a pyramid configuration based on his calculations, this thing could have been 10,500 feet tall. You're talking about a city that's basically a mountain in terms of height. Think about that. That, ladies and gentlemen, I think would make God come down to see what they're doing. Would it not? Not that he didn't already know, but he was wanting to come down. So you take something like this, that is approximately 2,700 feet tall, and then you take a tower, a city tower, built out of bricks that were cooked thoroughly, laying them flat, where you had a ziggurat configuration where each level was smaller than the preceding level. Theoretically, it could have been over 10,000 feet tall. Think about that. That's an amazing construction that modern day science, modern day man doesn't even attempt to do they? No. If you think about it, at 10,500 feet, you're starting to get into some serious thin air. Those of you who are sports fans, you know that when the football teams go to play the Denver Broncos in Denver, Colorado, what is that stadium called? Mile High Stadium, right? Because it's a mile above sea level at 5,280 feet. And you'll see football players who are not used to it, they're over there on the sideline getting the oxygen mask because they can't handle the 5,280-foot altitude. We're talking about something that was twice that in altitude, theoretically. That's thin air. They're literally building something that they're going to start getting in thin air the higher up they go. But theoretically, this is how tall the Tower of Babel could have been. Well, who was responsible for this? If you'll look with me in Genesis chapter 10, we know who is responsible for this. In Genesis chapter 10, starting with verse number 8, it says, "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar." So here we have Nimrod. Nimrod was the grandson of Ham, who was one of the 3 sons of Noah who was on board the ark, who got off the ark and began to be fruitful and multiply, and they had their own families. What was Ham famous for? Post-flood. He was famous for looking upon his father when he was drunken, was he not? Right. Shem and Japheth were the ones that went in backwards, didn't look upon their father, and they covered up his nakedness. But Ham is the one who looked upon him. And Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan," and that was one of the sons of Ham. "A servant of servant shall it be unto his brethren." Nimrod is a grandson of Ham. Nimrod, as an individual historical figure, was the first, really, if you think about it, he established the first empire in Sumeria, which is the Mesopotamia region. It's called the cradle of civilization. You've heard all that. You remember that when you had world history in school. But King Nimrod established the first empire in Sumeria. And I believe that when you look at the Tower of Babel, it is a foreshadowing of a one-world order. How do I say that, or why do I say that? I believe that there are 7 similarities between Nimrod and the Antichrist himself who will come on the scene someday. Number 1, his very name, Nimrod, means the rebel. And to me, that reminds me in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, where the Antichrist is regarded as the lawless one. The lawless one, the rebel, to me, that coincides. Number two, the form in which Nimrod's rebellion assumed was to create a confederacy, an open revolt against God. Why? To unify man. He says so here in Genesis chapter 11. We don't want to be dispersed. We don't want to be scattered. They also said here in the latter half of verse 4, let us make us a name. Let's make a name for ourselves. Let's make a name for ourselves. Don't worry about what God said to do. Let's do what we want to do. And Nimrod attempted to unify man through the construction of the city tower of Babel. We know that the Antichrist will attempt to unify humanity under his will, and for a short period of time, he will do just that. Also, some other characteristics between Nimrod and the Antichrist. You'll notice in Genesis chapter 10, I just read those verses, the word mighty is used to describe Nimrod, a mighty hunter. He was a mighty man. This also reminds me in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9, in reference to the Antichrist, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. He will be considered a mighty man as well, just like Nimrod was. Nimrod was also regarded as a hunter, as it says in Genesis chapter 10, verse 9. I believe that's also a picture of the Antichrist, because the Antichrist will attempt to hunt down and slay all the Jews and everyone, Jew or Gentile alike, who do not take the mark of the beast. It will be his mission in life to hunt down and slay the Jews and anyone who does not take his mark. Nimrod was also a king. As I said earlier, he basically established the first world empire. There's in Genesis 10:10, it mentions that. The Antichrist is also going to be called, as it says in Daniel chapter 11, verse 36, the king who will do according to his will. He is called the willful king in Daniel chapter 11. Nimrod's city, where they built Babel, the city tower of Babel, if you look at it on a map, it's in very close proximity to where the future city of Babylon was built. Basically, the Tower of Babel was the precursor to the city of Babylon. And in Revelation chapter 17, we know that the Antichrist himself is related to Mystery Babylon. Babylon will be revived during the 7-year tribulation period. It will be the economic center of the world, as it talks about in Revelation chapter 17. Last but not least, Nimrod's supreme ambition and his desire, as I just said earlier, was to make himself a name. Let's make ourselves a name. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says that the Antichrist will exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. The Antichrist himself will declare, I am God. He will blaspheme the temple at the midpoint of the tribulation period, offering swine there on the altar there in Jerusalem, in the tribulation temple. And then at that point he says, all bets are off. I'm wiping out all the Jews. Or he will attempt to do so. 2/3 of the Jews will die during the tribulation period. God will spare 1/3 of the Jewish population. So these are some comparisons between King Nimrod and the Antichrist that I think is a precursor from the Old Testament of how the Antichrist himself will be. That's King Nimrod. What about his wife? Excuse me, you don't hear or you don't read about Queen Semiramis, but she is just as wicked, if not even more so, I think, than Nimrod himself. Queen Semiramis, I believe that she is connected as the great whore of Babylon, because the occultic religion that she creates during the time of Babel has the same ripple effects just as strong today as it did back then. Well, tradition, there's no proof of this, but tradition states that Queen Semiramis at one time was the keeper of an inn/brothel. And that's how she and Nimrod first met. as the keeper of this inn brothel. Her name, Semiramis, means gift of the sea. So she and Nimrod decided to fictionalize her origin. They fictionalized, they told the people of Babel that Semiramis was actually a virgin who sprung forth out of the sea as a gift to Nimrod in his travels with his navy. He established a tremendous navy during this time. And the fictionalized account of how they met was concocted in this way. The key thing for her is that Queen Semiramis created an astrological religion. Specifically, this religion that she created said that there would be a child who would be born of a divine mother, who would supplant God, become a god himself, and return the earth's control to the serpent, i.e. Satan. This is the religion she created and the people worshiped in Babel. They said she was the divine mother. And her son, Tammuz, was this one who was supposed to take the earth from God, supplant God, and give it back to the devil himself. This religion stemmed all over the world. As a matter of fact, I thought it was fascinating that Jesuit missionaries went to Japan, China, Tibet, places that you would not think that this would be true. But when they went to these places, they found that in these countries, they were worshiping a divine mother and her child just as strongly as if they were Roman Catholic. I thought that was amazing. This occultic religion swept the entire world. It was in Greece, Rome, Israel, Egypt, Ephesus, India, China, as I mentioned, of course, Babylon itself. A little bit of background here about her son, Tammuz. Tammuz was actually an illegitimate child. She did not have Tammuz with Nimrod. Nimrod, of course, found out about it and threatened to expose Queen Semiramis of her true origin, who she really was. When he threatened that, to expose her, she had her priest kill King Nimrod during a New Year's Eve celebration. Later on, she said that her son, Tammuz, was Nimrod reincarnated. And that Nimrod would become the sun god, Baal. We all know who Baal was, don't we? Baal, as a false god, was a thorn in the Jews' side, was it not? All the time. Who was it that Elijah was having to deal with? The false prophets of Baal. Baal was a formidable false religion throughout this part of the world. And really, if you think about it, even to this day, Baal is still alive and well. Even though they may not necessarily be worshiping a statue called Baal, but the implication of this is still alive and well on planet Earth today, is it not? You still see this belief of a divine mother and her son who's supposed to supplant God. Now let me say this, and I know that this would probably be offensive to a lot of the people in the quote-unquote religious community. Mary is not divine. Let me say that again. Mary, the woman that God chose to bring the Savior into the world, is not holy, it is not divine. She is not God. I'll make that perfectly clear. Mary should not be prayed to. Mary should not be worshipped. Amen. She was just a Jewish virgin lady that God chose to be the vessel who would bring the Messiah into the world. There is nothing holy, righteous, divine about her. She is not an entity. She was just a woman. Yeah. That's all she was. Yet, this is prevalent all over the world. Okay? In dealing with this, that was the historical perspective of the Tower of Babel. Now let me bring it forward to the modern day. I mentioned this painting. Let me go back to it. Let me go back to the larger version of it. I mentioned this painting. I think that this painting is very significant because of the influence that it's had on modern day society. You would think, this? You're kidding, right? No, I'm not. Let's take a look at this. There is a connection between the Tower of Babel and the European Union. I believe that the European Union is the groundwork and the foundation that is going to be laid and has been laid for the revived Roman Empire. We know that the Antichrist himself will come out of the revived Roman Empire. And I believe that the European Union has laid out perfectly the groundwork for that to take place. I want you to take a look at this. First of all, this painting was done by a name of Peter Bruegel. Peter Bruegel was a Flemish painter during the Renaissance period. Around 1563, he did this painting of the Tower of Babel. I found it interesting when I was doing this research that the European Union created a poster to advertise or to promote or to market the European Union. Take a look at this. Does this not look like this? It does, doesn't it? That is their version of the Tower of Babel. Just like this Flemish painter's version of the Tower of Babel. The slogan down here at the bottom is Europe. Many tongues, but one voice. It's an attempt at unification, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, we're many tongues. You speak French, you speak German, you speak Spanish, you speak Greek, but we're all going to unify together. We're all going to come together under one banner, one voice. Here's something else of note. I don't know if you've ever paid any attention to the European Union flag. It's 12 stars, and I think there's a reason for that. But it's 12 stars. If you'll notice in this poster, you see the 12 stars. Do you notice that they're not like the American flag where they're straight up and down? They're upside down. If you'll pay attention to this, the upside down star, that looks like a pentagram. What is a pentagram? It's a symbol of Satanism. An upside down star or a pentagram is part of the satanic occult. Now, before I go any further, am I saying that anybody who lives in these countries as part of the European Union, that they're all Satanists? No, I'm not saying that. That the people who are politicians are all Satan worshipers? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is that the influence of Satan is very prevalent in the formation of the European Union. It is very obvious to me. The Tower of Babel, many languages, but they're one voice. That was not a mistake. It was not a mistake that all 12 of these stars are upside down. That is not a mistake, ladies and gentlemen. That is a subtle reference to the pentagram. That is also a subtle reference that Satan is behind the scenes working this to segue the Antichrist to come on the scene. Here's some more proof. Again, same painting by Peter Bruegel. Over here, if you're familiar with this, this is the Parliament building for the European Union, which is in Strasbourg, France. It's called the Louis Weiss building. If you'll notice, do you not notice that this building looks like it's not completed? You notice that? It's in a cylinder configuration, but it looks like they just stopped, that they haven't finished it. That's completed, by the way. That's the complete building. They purposely did it that way. Does it not remind you of the Tower of Babel, which was not completed? When God confounded their languages, they quit. They scattered abroad, as God had originally told them to do in the first place. This building resembles the artwork of the Tower of Babel. Another subtle clue that Satan is behind the scenes manipulating all of this in the last days. One more and I'll be done. I believe that between the Tower of Babel and the European Union, I believe that this is a defiant goal of man to reverse what God told him to do. God says, I want you to replenish the earth. Man cannot unify himself. Man does not have that ability. The age of innocence proved that man could not handle it. It took less than a year, I believe, for man to fall in a perfect environment, and perfect human beings fell. The age of conscience, I mentioned this last week. They had over 1,600 years to get that right, and they failed miserably. God had to wipe out humanity to save 8 people. the age of human government. Let me just go ahead and say this. Government is not the answer for society. Government is there for the laws to be adhered to, but government is not the answer for your day-to-day living. Government is not the answer to tell you this is what you should eat, this is when you should sleep, this is how you should think, this is how you should live. That's not government's place. The people who serve us in Washington, D.C., you'll notice I use the word serve. We do not serve them. They are supposed to serve us.
Amen.
Can I hear an amen on that?
Amen.
Their job as a congressman, as the president, as a person in the Supreme Court, whoever it is, their job is not to put their thumb on us. Their job is to serve the American people.
Right.
But we're seeing the reverse of that in the way of thinking there in the Beltway. Here in the European Union, I believe this is an attempt, and again, Satan is behind the scenes here, and he's pulling the strings to set the stage for the Antichrist to come on the scene. You'll notice that this is when the European Charter or Constitution was signed. I found this image. There's the flag down here. By the way, look at the flag. Do you notice that the stars are upright? In the poster, they were not. Well, that was a simple, no, it wasn't a simple mistake. That was deliberate. These stars are right here. This is when they were signing the charter here in the European Constitution, or the European Union Constitution. I just have some information here. It was signed in Rome. Rome will play a significant part during the 7-year tribulation, the city that sits on 7 hills. That will be where the Antichrist has his headquarters the first half of the tribulation period. The prophecy in Daniel chapter 2, it lets us know, in Daniel chapter 2, there will be an attempt by the devil, by his main servant, i.e. the Antichrist, and then his servant, the false prophet, to try to unify man. Man cannot unify himself.
Amen.
There's only one person who can unify all men regardless of their race, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their nationality. That's Jesus Christ.
Amen.
He is the only one who can unify us.
Yeah.
He's the only one that when we, as the song goes, when we all get to heaven, it doesn't matter if you were born a Filipino, it doesn't matter if you were born a Japanese, it doesn't matter if you were born in the United States of America. We will all have one voice there in glory because we're under the one banner of Jesus Christ. This is an attempt of Satan to say, I will mock God. And the reason why I brought that up about the 12 stars, why not 10? Why not 10? Because the revived Roman Empire, remember the 10 toes of the statue. Why isn't it 10 stars? Why 12? This is an attempt, I believe, at the devil mocking God. Think about the significance of the number 12. What does the number 12 in Bible numerology signify? It signifies what is finished or completed, forming a harmonious, perfect entity. That's what the number 12 represents in the Bible. Let me say it again. It is what is finished or completed, forming a harmonious, perfect entity. Think about the number 12 in the Bible. How many tribes was there of Israel? There was 12, right? How many disciples did Jesus Christ have? He had 12.